Good evening, everyone. My name is Ebony Golden, and I am your host for this evening. Welcome to Holy Waters, a ceremonial sojourn, the conversation series. This evening, I am joined by some beautiful folks who are going to get us into a conversation about climate and environment, climate reparations, environmental justice, and the ways in which we can approach living in right relationship with the planet through our work, through our service, through our art making, through our advocacy and activism. Before we get started, I'd like to share with you that I am an ebony colored person. I'm sitting in front of what's behind me is a yellow juju hat, a piece of art, and a plant. And I am wearing a gray top with purple lipstick, purple eyeshadow, and a gold nose ring. And my hair is in a messy ponytail on the top of my head. And I am on Lenape land in Harlem. My gender pronouns for today are she, her, hers. I'm originally from Houston, Texas. My people are from Houston, all over Texas, and from Louisiana. My mother was raised partially in Shreveport. My dad was raised partially in Beaumont. So I am a child of Texas and Louisiana for generations and generations deep, even though I live here in Harlem. I'm going to ask that we all introduce ourselves similarly. And I would love for you to respond to this prompt after you introduce yourself with who are you, who are your people, who are you, yes, who are your people, and tell us how you're relating to the land today. How are you relating to the land today?
Greetings, greetings. It's so good to see you as well. I am Jennifer Lee Gaia. I am sitting before a blank wall. There's a small object, but it's more for my modem. I have dark glasses on and earrings. I have a white shirt and a burnt orange sweater on. It's a shawl, and my hair is in a small ponytail. I am Afro-Pinay, Afro-Filipino, born and raised in Chicago. My father's people are from Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, and they have been there for several generations, at least 6, and my mother's people are from Pangasinan. I am in Chicago, as I said, and we are on Peoria and Iroquois land, among others. And right now, what is connecting me to my land is my people. That is my current practice, is the ancestral work that has emerged from the hands of my people and understanding how it manifests within me. Thank you so much, and shall I popcorn it? I will popcorn it to Nair.
Hi, my name is Nair Ransom, they, them pronouns. I am sitting in my office space. It has a white wall behind me, a navy blue couch with a navy blue and pink crocheted blanket that my great aunt made me. I am in my Captain Marvel desk chair. I have a aloe vera plant along with my rosemary and oregano. To my right, we have the lovely Louisiana sun beaming in through the window to my right. My hair is pulled back in a ponytail. I have my navy blue glasses and my navy blue and pink polo shirt. I am coming from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on, I believe, I know Biloxi as well as some others are in the space. I will definitely make sure I know that. specifically the next time. And yeah, I am originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I am a member of the reverse Great Migration of Black and Brown people from the North back to the South. My mother's people are, originally from Maryland, in that area. I am the child of two folks who are descendants of enslaved Africans. Um, so that is where I am. I am a part of the neo-indigenous movement of folks. And I will popcorn it to Dr. Skyler.
Thank you, Nair. I appreciate that. I am wearing, I would call it a uniform of all things citrus. I have on what might be a vibrant pink and yellow dress with a very, very multitudinous wood beaded necklace in gold made of wood. So you'll hear the cacophony of sounds between those beads hitting themselves and my Fulani large earrings, which are also supported by my other accessory, which is my bright red cat eye eyeglasses. And my crown, which is not a literal crown, but it is my fade and close shaven bald head on the sides with a low top on at the very top, a little bit of afro coming through. I'm still debating on what to do with that. And behind me is a blurred background to hopefully dim the glare of 114th Street behind me, with cream colored walls and a little bit of artwork in the background, but it's not very apparent because it's a blurred background. So thank you for having me here. And to complement my red cat eye glasses, I'm wearing a red lip. So I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm so happy to share space with all of this brilliance, all of this warmth. It feels lovely to be in this space, particularly after a day in an office. It feels like home, if that makes sense. So thank you for welcoming me. My pronouns are she, her, hers. My peoples are not dissimilar to the broader network of collective community that has already been shared. I was born in Florida, South Florida, and I grew up between Texas, a small area called Brazoria County outside of Houston, Texas, and also in New York City between Harlem, which is where my father's people are from, and the Bronx, which is where his people are from, who are my people. And my mother's people hail and still live in Florida in what we call the Muck, which I think is very central to this conversation in the affectionate way that we call the land there in South Florida, particularly in Belglade, because of the rich nutrients. It's an agricultural heaven, if you will, because of the soil. So we refer to it as muck. And with that, I like to say that I live at the beautiful intersection of both worlds. I grew up going to the Houston Livestock and Rodeo Show, where I've seen everyone from Selena to Gladys Knight, if I'm remembering correctly, or Destiny's Child, to also riding the 2 and the 5 all of my life, right? And for those of you who are New Yorkers, you know what that's about. So with respect to how I'm relating to the land today, I would say that I feel beautifully liberated, having had an opportunity to walk through Morningside Park and walk up and down 6 avenues, letting my slides, which are peach colored, I told you I was altering citrus today, just flap against the soles of my feet and hitting the concrete. So there's something very sentient for me about sounds, which is probably why I wear so many things that create sounds. So for me, though I didn't necessarily touch soil or touch earth, I did connect with the ground. And even in this brutal concrete landscape, I still felt engulfed in a very positive way by something familiar and sentiently comforting, the noises that only a city can make. And I like to recognize that I'm also in Harlem. I live and work in Harlem, and I'd like to honor the indigenous peoples of the Lenape.
I'm really happy to be here. My name is Judith Nieto. I have really curly hair, really dark curly hair that comes down to my neck. I have blue and brown speckled round glasses. I'm a brown woman, and I am wearing a beaded necklace that I got in Mexico. So yeah, you can imagine a ray of sunshine constructed out of beads. That's what they look like in a rainbow pattern. I'm wearing a floral purple, deep purple shirt. My background is organized chaos. There's artwork on my wall, to-do lists and a calendar, and some technological um, cabinets to hold all of my technology during the day. This is my work office and studio, so there's always a mess in the background. Either I'm working on something, so that's sort of what you're seeing right now, or if you can imagine it. I am a migrant person, an immigrant person. I was born in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, and ended up there through forced migration. But my peoples are land-based people from the mountains of San Luis Potosí, Mexico, and Veracruz, Mexico, on my paternal side. And yeah, we came on vacation to Houston and never left. So I call Houston home. That's where I grew up, in the East End, and also where I first became involved in environmental justice movement and pushed me to do that work. Now I live in the city of Huntsville, Texas, also Cato, Atacapayshak, and Bedai territories, but connected very much to the city of New Orleans as well as Houston. So I travel between the Bayou cities to do the work that I do, and as an artist, cultural strategist, and language justice worker, my work just kind of takes me all around and keeps me migrant and flowing. So it's where I feel like I'm most in service of my community, in the ways that yeah, we flow through each other's ecosystems. And the way that I am relating to land today, I guess I'm learning the language of land and what that means in action, in our work, in the ways that we move. I live in a space that I am stewarding and learning so much with the land about the types of native plants that grow here, the wetlands that actually exist here that we overlook because we just think they're marshy areas and muddy places. But I'm getting to learn just like the beauty that it creates, and how it expands other gardens in the land, that actually like fuel a lot of the fruits and flowers that grow here. And it's just been beautiful to witness, and also taking a lot of notes as well, and being humbled, because it is hard work to maintain land and develop it and think of all the things, to be able to survive on it and thrive. And so I've definitely been humbled and fallen on my ass quite a few times. But I'm learning, and I'm just getting back up and trying again. And
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I am so grounded and centered by your yes. Yesterday, we had the first episode taping of Holy Waters, and it was quite a magical time. And I am just as floored today as I was yesterday, as if I didn't know that this was about to happen. I want to just start by giving you a little bit of context and giving our audience a little bit of context as to why Holy Waters, why a ceremonial sojourn, and where I'm coming from in curating this conversation series, which will be a 3-part series that is produced and presented by High Arts. And High Arts, I should say, is an organization also based here in Harlem that has worked diligently in service of artists that are making work about social change, social justice, but also formerly the Hip Hop Theater Festival, really using the aesthetics of the urban to build art. And now that's blossomed and under the leadership of the folks that are there now into many different directions. It is because of High Arts that you all are able to be here on this Zoom today. They've been wonderful collaborators and supporters of my work for quite a clip of time, if I can say so. And it's been really transformative. It's provided an archive of my practice, and it's also provided resources to do the deeply embedded work that I like to do in community that extends beyond the classroom, the stage, the strategy space. And so what I would like for you all to start to melt into is how to talk about these topics around environment and climate from a position that is that activates storytelling and the poetic and the creative, that allows all of the people that come with you to be able to be seen and heard. Give us your remedies, give us your recipes, give us your stories, your folklore. And within that, I am finding more and more that the strategy and the way forward is through activating that cultural memory, that past that comes through so many of our lineages and families. I have been doing this work of gathering stories with families, with scholars, with artists for over 20 years. And I've done this in the realm of reproductive justice, education justice, immigration justice, and many other aspects of my activist career. Now I am situated and fully involved and invested in where we are now with climate and environment. And I've been here for a minute, using the kind of coming in through the lens of housing justice. I've been thinking about how our environments have been and are impacted by climate. And I am talking about political climate, excuse me, something's in my eye. I'm talking about political climate, economic climate, and the climate that comes through the natural and supernatural world as well. And so what we have here is the opportunity to think about how we want to be in better relationship with the natural world and the built environments that we inhabit. And in doing so, shift the climate, shift the impact that we have on climate in many ways. And so I'm thinking about environment and environmental justice through an intersectional eco-womanist lens that allows us to see the whole of what's informing and impacting us, and allow us to shift in a way that encourages and enlivens the most of us, regardless of positionality and identity. We all deserve to be here. We all deserve to have access to this planet. And so an eco-womanist framework allows for that type of expansive and cumulative way of thinking about the world, and how to be in right relationship with the world. I'm just recently getting back from Alabama. I was there with Jennifer's family and with some other families talking about land stewardship, and really what it has become such a a gift and a tool, like a whole toolkit, I should say, is what it means when a family decides to spend time with you. And that's why I'm asking you to think about stories and to think about folklore and to think about what the elders have taught you and continue to teach us, because that's what I find I have been finding to be extremely motivational. Sitting with a 96-year-old who is responsible for writing the check for the taxes on her family's land, and the one responsible for making sure other people know how, or getting in an all-terrain vehicle with Jennifer's father and surveying the spaces where they are, allowing folks to come and hunt deer, and driving these country roads and stopping because, I see an image of gourds or bottle trees, along the countryside. And I'm wondering, what are people doing here? What are people growing here? I should also say that for those of you who don't know me, that I am a theatrical ceremonialist. And so my work is in using theater as a platform for building community and also sharing the ceremonies that have sustained us in good times and bad. I'm making a piece called In the Name of the Mother Tree that really privileges the technologies and the ways of land stewardship and water work that come from coastal and rural Southern communities. And I found my initial research and field work was rooted in the Gullah Islands because I lived in North Carolina for a while. And after doing several field trips and rounds of field work in the Gullah Islands, I started to really crave home and the Gulf of Mexico waters. I wanted to go traipsing around in those swamps and marshes and talk to people who are doing work in a space that I call home, And so that has led me now into this piece of taking my company and other folks who are interested in doing this work all over the place to do these sojourns. And really a sojourn in the Southern Black tradition is you go and you sit on somebody's porch for a while or at the kitchen table for a while and you listen. And the downloads that are coming through when people just agree to sit with you, I am amazed. I am amazed. And so that's what I want to just ground us in. And I also want to ground us in what I'm going to share a part of my my curatorial statement for this body of work. And then I'm going to ask you another question. Call to ceremony. In the beginning, there was water, and water was life. Water was our first home. Water ushered us into the world, and for the rest of our lives, we must negotiate our relationship with this powerful force of nature. For some, water is the root of spiritual practice, washing us into new phases of being, cleansing us of despair, and elevating us into new realms of consciousness and possibility. Water is a portal of purification and potential. Gazing deep into its ripples and waves has been the way of miracle makers and mystics who have sought to find the meaning of life. From baptisms to burials, water provides, teaches, destroys, and redefines what it means to be a part of this planet. Water is all. So with that being said, I want to open the floor or invite us all to the kitchen table or the porch for a talk, to sit a spell and talk about these concepts. But before I ask a question, I want to just see what's on your mind. What's on your heart as it relates to your work, as it relates to your people, as it relates to place, the natural world, the supernatural world, anything top of mind as I've kind of talked a little bit, what's coming up for you?
I guess I'm thinking a lot about the bodies of water that I've traveled through, or traveled on or have been fearful of. And yeah, I think the way that you framed it is helping me to to see those things as lessons, as my teachers, and really just sitting with the reflection that I've been learning all of this time just by traveling through water, over water, even just my body traveling through space and time, and just kind of figuring out how that also parallels with being water and traveling and flowing through other bodies of water, and what that really means. So I'm just, it's really, it's really impacting me in that way, where I'm rethinking the way that I'm seeing water as a body, not just a pond or a river or an ocean, but our own bodies and how we communicate to each other or with each other.
I mirror that, Judith. I am thinking about water, and I'm thinking about the water around Japan, and I'm thinking about the food that those who eat fish will not have access to. And then I return as well to the water of the body and the saliva, tears, the waters of the bodies, and the feelings that I encounter are anger, these notions of rage, and contending with these two feelings of thinking about this beautiful water that's in my body, and the water that is on this body of earth, and the impact that it's having on me, and this process of reckoning. What does that look like?
In all honesty, in terms of water, I have probably a somewhat contrarian position. I am a Pisces. I love water. I feel most liberated in water, near water, most relaxed, most in tune and attune with nature and the universe when I'm near water. And also, when I think about an almost drowning incident that I had at the age of 12, I also maintain um, a somewhat, it's unfair to say paralytic fear, but quite frankly, that's what it is. I know how to swim. I know the function of swimming. I understand it. I took swimming lessons for years. I come from parents who swim. And after that, I recognize that though I feel all of those things, all of those enveloping things that I described about water, for water, lured by water, I also at the same time, quite simultaneously, feel fear. But interestingly enough, the fear doesn't, it's very difficult to use the word trump in its natural and its natural definition, without the very kind of traumatic reference, but it doesn't trump my desire to be near or close to water. So with that, as I think about all the things that you've described and your relationships with water, the connections you have with water, I also honor the complex relationship that I have with water, while also honoring water, and also Yemanja, who I also feel very divinely connected to through water. And incidentally, I just returned from Switzerland with students for a course I co-taught there around climate justice. And Switzerland is a uniquely beautiful place when it comes to nature and greenery, but you're surrounded by lakes. So water was very much a part of our immersive experience as well. So for that, I'm grateful.
Would you like to offer something?
I would like to start by saying thank you all for what you have offered. And the space that I exist in, and I realized only now at this phase of my life, like in relation to water, has always been the combination of like water, land, and built environment. Um, and that is like what I'm perpetually thinking about. I was born in Philly, spent my formative years in, like a large metropolitan space, yet still on a river. Like my favorite place to be growing up was, Penn's Landing. And we can have the conversation about colonialism later. Just in the name Penn's Landing, but like moving from that space, moving from the city of firsts and literally doing the Great Migration backwards to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and then like being on this very powerful, symbolic, historic body of water, and like being very close to that space. I will also offer, my zodiac sign. I'm a Sagittarius. I'm a fire sign. Um, so in a lot of ways, like water represents a sense of balance for me, because I very much tend to, lean towards the, like burn hot and fast. Um, you know, and like I realize that like when I'm in like just these very kind of frantic states sometimes when I'm experiencing that rage that um, was spoke about by Lagaya, you know, I realized that like the space where I center most is, like near bodies of water, like sitting on the levee, and like writing, like being able to like have a space where I have a sense of like flow and movement, um you know um and also my connection to like water in terms of like moving to Baton Rouge the year before Katrina, and that being like my very first instance of seeing like instances of climate gentrification and things like that, and very much like learning like we have a rapper from Baton Rouge, Kevin Gates. One of his phrases is, "I know it's a name for it, but I don't know what to call it." And like having that experience of like being very engaged in um, questioning social structures my entire life since I started school. Like English and social studies had always been like my favorite subjects. And then like watching the interplay between, like language, social structure, proximity to like place and resource and culture and all of those things just interplaying constantly. Um, so those are the kind of things that I think about in this space.
I like to get us into some storytelling. Some of the things that I remember growing up that really connected me to the land and that I can remember now is climbing trees. I was always up in a tree as a child, and I would climb up to the top of a tree and daydream. I haven't actually thought about that in such a long time, but as I was preparing this question, it came back to me that I had a favorite tree as a child in the backyard. And and folks would be so afraid that I would fall. I did fall. I fell out of that tree. And all kinds of things ensued. But I love to be in the top of trees. And I love to get into a tree and sing. This is when I was a kid. I was in an elementary school, I know. And I just can't, I can't imagine living, having a childhood without spending copious amounts of time outside, you know, running and playing and dreaming and rolling around in grass and all of these kinds of things. But I'd like to open this question up to you all about a story that fondly connects you to land, or one of your early memories. Yeah. Take a moment and think about that. And whoever would like to go first, please do.
I didn't need a moment. Thank you, Ebony. You know, in contrast, to, like you being, or maybe similarly, depending on perspective, being in trees, as a child, I wanted to dig in dirt. Like that was my favorite place. Fingers in dirt, wet, all kinds of dirt. I was fascinated by different kinds of dirt. I even got ringworms. And we have a scar. But a fond memory I remember, that like very much connected me to like land, dirt, the earth. I moved into my grandparents' old house when they passed away when I was 8 years old in Willingboro, New Jersey. And started going to school in Jersey. I have a brother who's a year older than me, and this was like his first year in middle school. So this was our first year not going to school together. I'm walking home, and after it rains, I see this earthworm that's like half dry and like kind of wiggling around on the sidewalk. And little me is like, oh my God, I have to save this earthworm. I already knew that baby, that, the dry part would grow back. So, I picked it up, I broke off the little dry part and I carried it back to the backyard of my grandparents' house and, like dug a little hole for it and like dropped it in the dirt. And, like that was one of the moments where I was, just like, once again, the innocent childhood, like, oh, protect the earth, protect the land, protect the creatures of the earth.
So I'm a city girl, I will admit. I'm from Chicago, born and raised, and we lived in the city, like in the city, right? But in one of my first memories with the earth was actually being and sitting with my mom and watching my mother transform this really gritty city backyard space into this beautiful garden. There was not a lot of, it's concrete backyard, but still small little spaces of earth for us to take advantage of. And one of the first, we moved around a lot, but one of the first buildings and the first plots and the first experiences was tomatoes. She grew tomatoes out the side. It was by the small planter. And I remember her taking the salt and she said, come on, let's go. She takes me to the back where the fruit, the tomatoes are. And she takes one and she puts it on there and she bites it. Oh, this is so good. And she tastes it, she put some more. She said, here, taste it. And she lets me taste this fresh, delicious tomato from the garden, watching it and seeing it from nothingness, from seed into this beautiful experience. I think that was one of my real first experiences with like the magic of soil, the magic of earth. Yeah. And then, after that, she grew corn on the side of the garage. So like this magical potential, right? So yeah, that was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think similar, but not so much. I was born in Reynosa, so it's more of a city. Even though when I was born, it was still like barely developing. But I think my first memories go back to water again, because my family, like I said, they're land-based people from San Luis Potosí, which is further in the center of Mexico, and Reynosa is at the border of Texas and Mexico. So very different landscapes and very different accesses to water. The reason why my family had to immigrate was because they lost access to water to continue to cultivate their lands and grow what we're known for, which is chile piquin. It's a tiny, very spicy pepper, and that's what my family grows. But one of my first memories was remembering one summer that it was really hot and we were just burning up. Mind you, we didn't have technology then, no AC, you know, still like we lived in a very small home. We still had dirt floors, because again, my family's migrating. And my grandma and my mom take us down the way from where we were living to this small creek. Mind you, now it's not at all the same. Very dirty place, dirty water, or they've just overdeveloped it, and the water's just not clean. But when I was growing up, I do remember this summer where we ventured off into this small creek, the water running clear, very beautiful, rocks everywhere, and my mom just letting us roam free for a little bit and just, you know, grab rocks, sit in the water and cool off. And we weren't afraid of the water, you know. Maybe my mother was being a little bit mindful, but we weren't afraid. I don't remember being afraid of the water, and just cooling off and just being so grateful to have this little creek behind the house as access, to cool off. And yeah, growing up, we've witnessed that little creek just, you know, be completely destroyed and not be the same. And so I give thanks that I got to live that childhood still, where even in a developing country, we were still like able to find these small bodies of water that were still untouched and still not developed, and getting to spend time in them. I think that was my first time, in nature in that way with my mom.
It's something that is in your stories that's very revelatory. I'm connecting these threads around intimacy, and that's something that I've been discovering in my learning about climate and environment, climate reparations and environmental justice, that oftentimes the people that I'm sitting with have such deeply profound memories and experiences around nature. It isn't a lot of money involved. It isn't overly complicated. It's typically something that galvanizes the family. You know, we can be nourished from it. We can have this collaboration with the natural world to feed ourselves. You know, it's recreation. It's awe-inspiring. It can be the first times we understand the power of the unknown, you know, like what Dr. Schuyler was just talking about in terms of almost, you know, drowning. The power, the force, of nature is something that it requires just a moment to, you know, to think about. From a very early age, we understand these things. We have experiences that open us up, or, you know, and open us up and clarify for us, okay, what is happening here? And I would love to have you all talk a little bit more about that in your own words. What's the relevance? What's the opportunity that comes with building intimacy in a relationship with the natural world, whether it's land, whether it's, you know, air, whether it's water? I know some of us here, and we're going to get into that, are doing river work and ocean work. But I want to just, you know, just from your own personal lived experience, why is it important? You know, I also from the perspective of being a strategist and a teacher, you know, what do we want people to really feel about their connection to the planet? And so I'm asking this question about intimacy and thinking about that as well. what's the opportunity that comes with building an intimate relationship with the natural world, with the land and the water that we are sharing here?
Climate intimacy is extremely difficult to advance in the face of capitalism. I think capitalism and consumerism actually work adversarially against climate intimacy, because what they teach by design, or at least what they model to us by design, is that it's about the individual. So it's not at all about a connection to anything or anyone. And I think that's very intentionally so. I think the ethos of indigeneity is one that maintains the constancy of connection around the collective good and well-being of others and community in relationship. And intimacy is the lifeblood of that connection. So climate intimacy, I would posit, actually lives within every individual that is Black, Indigenous, Brown, and identifies as a person of color. I think it is, I love that Nair put in the chat, speaking about being a steward, is that, if I can quote you, Nair, all children are naturally stewards. As we get older, it becomes a process of remembrance. And I'd like to parallel that to my point about climate intimacy. I think it's innate to most of us, this intimate relationship with land, with water, with nature, our connection and curiosity to it. However, I think we are slowly indoctrinated through capitalist priorities and the intense kind of inundation of messaging. And I say this as a generalization, of course, not every single person, but as a general application to society, that we almost fail to remember the intimacy. And I think that's where the crisis point is. I think it starts as a tension point when we stop remembering, or we can't access the memories as readily or easily. And then I think it becomes, at least it moves from a tension point to a point of crisis when we can no longer recall the relationship as an intimate one. And then we feel disassociated from it. And I think that's when the violence against land and nature and the climate occurs. And quite frankly, the capitalism drives a sense of non-accountability. And I think that's really what we're confronting now, right? Those of us who feel that we are actors and wanting to transform our world in a regenerative way, in a restorative way, in a just way, to right the relationship. And then those who portend that it has nothing to do with them, that it's so absent from consciousness that it doesn't feel relevant. And I think that is largely driven by the disassociation from intimacy. There's not a connection anymore. And I believe capitalism and consumerism is at the root of that.
I'm just going to throw it out here. So what do we do with that? You don't have to answer it, Dr. Schuyler, but anybody else want to talk about this rupture that is man-made between us and our ability to experience climate intimacy? But with that being said, any other thoughts about that? What's in the way, and what supports the advancement of climate intimacy?
Oh, go ahead. I'll be brief. I think the other thing that I think about is how we define climate intimacy, and what is that definition for different people. Because I think it's not but, right, or, but it's and, that sometimes some of us develop climate intimacy because we've been impacted by climate disasters or climate impacts, where we've been forced to develop an intimacy with each other because we're finding ourselves as evacuees, taking folks who are evacuating, caregiving, towards our communities, or helping to source resources for those impacted communities, that also creates a space for building climate intimacy and what it really means. How do we forge these live webs, live supports, lifelines, to each other in different communities when we're being impacted? And so, yeah, I do agree. Capitalism really puts that separation between the potential to build even deeper climate intimacy, and also I think we're defining that. I think we're finding out how to fortify sustainable relationships to continue to be support networks, and to continue to resource up the communities that will continue to be impacted by climate disasters and impacts. And instead of creating, that dependency, though I don't think that dependency between communities is wrong, but also, like, let's skill each other up, let's resource each other up to be able to withstand what else is just around the corner, whatever other disaster may come out of who knows what, right? The climate is changing so drastically, and it's different every year, and we also don't know where we're headed in terms of climate. Yeah, I'll pass it over to you, Nair, if you had something to add.
You definitely said it beautifully, Judith. The only thing that I would like add, or maybe like say a little bit more explicitly, is that from my perspective, like, it's really just a crisis of intimacy, in a sense, like, and also like looking at even the word intimacy in a sense in a very like shallow versus like nuanced and holistic way. Like, we live in a culture and a society that like emphasizes pleasure, and I would even say superficial pleasure, or even like, like the microwave pleasure, right? Versus like genuine connections, right? Circling back to the examples that Judith gave, when you're in a lot of these like dire situations that are, environmental disasters, you know, um, I've never seen community built so quickly than in those moments. And the question that I found myself asking every time I see the ways communities respond to these dire situations, is how do we sustain that sense of community when it's not a dire situation? How do we trigger a mindset, an ethic, a culture that behaves like that day in and day out? Because that's when we're looking at like mitigation practice versus just response, right? That's when we're looking at how we're building our cities versus, cities that are literally built to foster consumerism and individualism and me mindset, versus societies that are built on like, we are all interconnected. And when we have a sense that we collectively as a human body, as a human, existence, are connected, then we can make the jump, from only certain cultures having that particular framework to it being, like a global societal framework of, we are connected to our land, we are connected to our water, our land nourishes us, so we water and nourish our land, right?
Jennifer, I want to bend this question a little bit, just because I was just in your home with your people. I want to there is a way in which your family practices intimacy with the natural world that I witnessed. There is a storytelling over how your great-grandmother became a landowner. There's a story that I heard, and there are different kind of windows that I was able to peek inside of about your great-grandmother. Is your great-grandmother?
Yes.
What's her name again? Can you say her name?
Bessie Henson.
Miss Bessie. Miss Bessie. And I wanna ask you to answer this question about intimacy through the lens of the work that you're currently doing with the residency and the work that we were just doing there, if I may. I know it's early, I know it's still very fresh and percolating, but whatever you feel, you know, called to share about that space in terms of intimacy, that might be helpful. Please add in whatever you were about to say, but
yes. So I appreciate that framing. So I'm drawn to start with this idea of rupture, this theme of rupture that has started to emerge, and the rupture being spaces where community is allowed to show itself. These key opportunities for newness, new things, new possibility. And the rupture requires a dissolution of all the systems. That's how this possibility shows up and emerge, demonstrates itself. And there is this connection. I was thinking about how capitalism causes this dissociation with so many things, but with the self, dissociation from the self, from the body, from the identity, from the roles. And once there's a disassociation from the self, there's like a disconnection with all the things. If you don't have a connection to yourself, you don't have a connection to your people and all the things. And that is what I was thinking about when it comes to this intimacy and this, the dissociation and that rupture that capitalism kind of has when it comes to thinking about intimacy, but thinking about returning to this idea of rupture and possibility with regards to my family's story. It was the work of the family and the work of my mother's hands through the support of the family that she was able to save enough to purchase these 3 acres. And it was the work of the family that spread the word out, that said, hey, this plot of land is available right next to, we have an ancestral church down in Montgomery, and our ancestral burial ground is there as well, so that my great-grandfather and the men of the church were part of those founding members, so had served pastorally and whatnot. But this intimacy in terms of the community that the church built and the spreading of the word, so that it's possible that a woman and a Black woman in Montgomery, Alabama can buy 3 acres of land with her own hands, right? And that magic that happens there. But then also,
and when was this, Jennifer? When did she buy that land?
I want to say, so as far as, yeah, we're thinking about the 50s, like 1950, right? So this is, still very, this, and in Montgomery, Alabama, right? So things are hot, it's hot. So that, again, this movement, like the power of land and the vision, the possibility, and the world making, the radical imagination that is possible when land is available. This radical imagination that emerges, so that generations later, I'm able to return. I'm able to listen to a call that says, come back, and not only bring you, but bring others, bring more people, so that not only you can experience this intimacy, but more people can share the stories, can speak, so that this residency, it's beyond me. This residency was planted in 1865 when my great-great-great-grandfather was born. And, so this deep listening is required, the intimacy of listening. Because it's not just in my flesh, but it's right in here. So I thank you, Ebony, for asking and reminding me of these small things. And that's not it. I'm still processing, but that's what's coming to mind right now. Mm-hmm.
We had a deep, deep, deep time in Alabama, and we were all over Alabama from Africatown to Birmingham. But the work that we did there through the Holy Waters Ceremonial Sojourn, and Jennifer called us and said, "Oh, y'all going across the South? Come here. I got something for y'all." And we were able to focus, my team was able to focus on Jennifer's family and on a family that is, I know from East Texas, that also has roots in Alabama. So this the way that we migrate and move, and the way that we are moving because of land and water and capitalism is really, it's quite, it's a way of going back, Sankofa, in the Sankofic way of going back and fetching it so we can go forward, and remembering that we are a part of a through line. There's also something that I want to lift up that, Jennifer, I'm still processing too, our Alabama time. But there is something about the way in which cooperative, like in terms of extractive economic practices, we got it, right? But there is something about cooperative economics that it comes to the forefront. And somebody else, come off mute. We at the kitchen table, so jump in when y'all ready to jump in. But cooperative economics is something that I really understand, through the lens of your family, and the lens of the other family that we were there, the Coopers, that we were also there, sitting with as well. There is a way in which to build intimacy and to build a practice of stewardship that isn't extractive. And I'm thinking about, and I could, now that I'm talking about it, Jennifer, I can think about the women who were able to come into your great grandmother's space. I can think about, the people who were fed, the stories that were shared, the prayers that happened because there was a space to be. So that harmonizing between the built and the natural world in the edification of a community. Somebody come on in. We can just pop in when you're ready. Thoughts and ideas.
Yeah. So a lot of what this is making me think about is like I have almost like the opposite relationship in a sense. Like a lot of the stories of like my family is like land loss. And like kind of like this search perpetually for like a land and a space. And a lot of that due to, once again, just like a combination of like a multitude of systemic issues in terms of like housing and land, like policy and things of that nature, just like not being accessible or like understandable to like, the average folk. Or at least like, or being in like these states of crisis, where you're not necessarily critically thinking in ways that'll help you maintain and like keep hold of your land and things of that nature. Like I can't think of an ancestral space that my family owns. So a lot of the work that I do is very much informed by like figuring out ways to like heal that in other people. Like I'm thinking deeply about like policy and like land rights and things of that nature. And like even this conversation definitely like makes me think about like specifically the adjudicated property process in terms of like Louisiana and like Louisiana inheritance laws and things of that nature. You know, like folks have the conversation about the reason why there's a lot of blighted properties in, you know, Baton Rouge is because of like complex inheritance laws and like ways and like succession and all of that fun stuff. But at the same time, I'm like, these laws keep land in people's families. Um, which even circles us back to these ideas of intimacy and connection and maintaining familial connections and things of that nature. And how do we maintain those connections so that this land stays in people's family and also like stays stewarded over by these families, versus, you know, folks with X amount of dollars being able to buy people out of their land. Um, you know, so like these are constantly swimming in my mind. You know, when I hear these stories.
Yeah, I feel like a little bit of a combination between both your stories. As a person who comes from a family that has land in Mexico, still in our family, not through deeds or anything like that, but like real land-based laws where if you're working the land, that is yours and continues to be in your lineage as long as your descendants continue to work the land. And so it's complex, but it's where my family's from. And it's it brings me joy and pride to know that that's our legacy and our cultural legacy, and also sad because I'm not in that space anymore, and I grew up here. I'm living my life here. It's not easy to live there without all of the amenities and all of the things to be able to survive on that landscape and in that land. And so it's it's a struggle that I continue to sort of grapple with and think about ways that I want to go back to my people's lands. I want to go back at some point and be there, reclaim the land in certain ways. We've started that already. My mom and her sister, my aunt, have started to go back and build on this land, and you know, started to put in new amenities, utilities, so that we can continue to go and visit, you know, and so that we don't lose that cultural inheritance as well. But being in the US is a different story as well. Like we are immigrant people. We've fought to have the little bit that we do have and have acquired. Now, because my mom has worked her ass off all her life and now have acquired a bit of wealth to be able to buy property, we did buy this property that I'm at right now in Huntsville, intentionally far enough away from Houston because we kept experiencing disasters, environmental and industrial disasters. We're from the East End. We all live near Galena Park, Pasadena, Manchester area, and so we've been in ground zero for some of the worst explosions Houston has ever seen. And so, you know, we put our little coins together and our brains together to think about ways that we can own land outside of the city for these types of disasters, and to provide a space for my family, and my community, our communities, to find refuge out here. And so it's hard to be here as a steward and to try to develop and to try to maintain, and do it with the help of my family, but also just like myself, my partner, my friends. It's a lot of work, and so it's a humbling experience, right? To try to go back to a way of life that my ancestors only knew. And so this is my way of reclaiming that land-based knowledge, that land-based way of living, and finding regeneration through that, and through struggling to make it happen. But also, yeah, like contending with the policies that kept us away from our lands, our people, and then also the policies that could potentially continue to keep us away from accumulating generational wealth here in the US, aside from Mexico, and figuring out what that means, you know, and bringing up our young people in our culture and telling them our stories, and hoping that they don't assimilate too far into this way of thinking that we won't be able to go back and really maintain the lands in Mexico, because we lose them if we don't continue to work them.
So many things coming up. The power of stewardship and relationship to the land, cultural inheritance, and its link to land intimacy, being able to collaborate in a community sense, the challenges, the work, the labor of stewardship. I want to turn our conversation a bit to Skylar. Dr. Skylar, I saw your unmute, so I'll come to you. I want to just set this and put this in the air, and we can add to it. I want you to talk. Let's do some name dropping now. I think we've gotten a sense of who we are as people and folk, but you are here because you are doing in some of the most radical work around, our rivers, our oceans, family and performance work, working with students. And so I want to just put in the air, right? What are the ways in which you feel like your work is addressing climate justice and climate reparations, environmental justice and climate reparations? And tell us about these policies. Tell us about the things that we, those of us who are in the art space, or those of us who are in other spaces, we may not know about, some of these policies. Nair, this time I'm ready for you to geek out on this, because I know you are in there deep with these policy papers. What's happening, within the work you're doing that's inspiring you, but also what are some things you might want to educate people about as it relates to things? Yesterday, we had a very spiritual, metaphysical, folk medicine conversation. And that conversation was absolutely needed. It was a cleansing. And we have the opportunity in this conversation to continue to bring in those recipes and those rituals. So drop those in too, if they feel relevant to the work that you are, wanting to share today. Tell us about who you have aligned with in terms of your professional work, and how is it helping you to understand the movings of people, the movings of this planet, the policies and legislation that you might want your community to know about if they got wind of this thing that we're doing today?
I just wanted to add, when we were talking about cultural inheritance and property, etc., and the intimacy with land, I think it's a very complex issue, and I say this as not in any way as a cynic, but as a pragmatic optimist. It's very complex, and I'm speaking from my positionality as a Black woman, as someone with the privilege of education and earnings. And it's complex because when we talk about the inheritance of land, which is usually subsequent to the loss of life, oftentimes there's a unique pressure, and I think this needs to be aired in the space, because there's pragmatic considerations. Oftentimes, and more frequently than not, with the rising cost of burial, putting people away into rest, it's very expensive. And I'm sure this is not only an experience had in my family, but people have to come together to bury folks. And more often than not, there is a dynamic that is born out of stress, grief, pain, hurt, generational trauma, feelings of resentment, for those who got out, and feelings of entitlement as divine payment for those who didn't. And oftentimes with that comes very heated, sometimes hurtful, sometimes insidious with action, conversations or non-conversations, and only actions where, grandmama's house, big mama's house, nana's house, pop's house, it ends up being sold. And it's not always sold because there's not a clear understanding about the importance of cultural inheritance and intimacy with land. It's often sold because there's this, and I know you can speak of this from what I've heard, Nair, there's property taxes. So even when you have air property, who's going to maintain the taxes? And I got to tell you, at my age now, I look at the movie Soul Food so differently than I looked at it when it first came out. So differently. I understand it so different. I don't even know if y'all know that movie, but it's I think about the character Terry, I think was her name. I have a lot more compassion for Terry. And I think that's often because sometimes the sentimentality of the desire for connection and the maintenance of land and inheritance of land doesn't always align with the very practical, pragmatic resources needed to maintain it. And even when there is a sentimental and a spiritual desire and imploring of commitment to do so, it often falls on one or maybe two. And with Black women becoming the breadwinners, if you will, in the families, that becomes even more complex because we're raising generations. And so when you're faced with and I apologize for being long-winded in this, but I think it needed to be said, when you're faced with decisions around being able to maintain by yourself the property taxes of auntie's house or grandma's house, which keep going up by yourself, and everybody, of course, wants you to do it, but nobody's contributing, it's complicated. But I don't think that divorce, there's automaticity in divorcing an individual who's confronted with that very difficult decision of no longer being able to do that because they can't afford to, or because they have children that are getting ready to go to college, or because their mortgage went up, or because they've had a transition in their job, or whatever it may be. That it doesn't mean that they're divorced from this deep understanding and longing for the inheritance that is critical to a regenerative advancement for yourself, for those who come before you, after you, your descendants, etc. Sometimes it is a heartbreaking decision, and I just think that I wanted that to also be said in this space.
Yeah, no need to apologize. No need to apologize. There isn't a need for naivete, right? It's complicated dynamics all around. There can be, challenge and love. There can be intimacy and rigor, and how that rigor is expressed and experienced. And I think it is important because, when you have to sit at the policy table, when you have to sit and talk to people who are not interested in or don't care about grandma's house, right? When you have developers coming in, wiping out whole communities, right? It does require a strategy that is not built on sentimentality and just emotion. We need to know what's going on, which I actually think, Dr. Schuyler, that your tough love and sharing that information is the perfect runway to talk about policy, to talk about what's happening. How do we address this? How do we address this on a local government level, on a national government? Like, what's going on? But addressing it aside, do we even know what to address, and when is it in the legislative cycle? When is it even on the docket for us to talk about? So I'm gonna go back to Nair. Nair, tell us who you are working with and in service of what? Yes. And what's going on in terms of policy? What's going on?
Okay, so I work with an organization called Ocean Conservancy. The place in which I sit is called Port Community Liaison. The space that I'm specifically working in is concerned with the decarbonization of port infrastructure, where we are putting new port infrastructure, how these funds are being disseminated, all of these sorts of things in that intersection. I am specifically focused on the southern Louisiana region, the ports between Baton Rouge and the port of New Orleans, along the Mississippi River. So when we're thinking about policy, the largest pieces of legislation that we have been looking at has been, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, and the Justice 40 Initiative, right? And essentially, like, how all of these things are working together. These are policies that release a lot of funds, and that have the potential to be very revolutionary. However, we also know that, as one of my colleagues once said, the government can either spend money well or they can spend money fast. They typically don't do both. And the time constraints on a lot of these pieces of legislation is like by 2025, 2026. Some of their goals are reaching to, like 2030, things of that nature. But in the span of policy and like policy change, that is still a relatively quick amount of time. Even if you're talking about 10 years or like 15, so on and so forth. So the way that I am positioned is more along the lines of like, how are we organizing communities to advocate for themselves? I am working with, at the moment, roughly 11 local organizations and change makers in the southern Louisiana region, in terms of one, shifting focus, shifting kind of conversation, shifting consciousness in terms of looking at, once again, port decarbonization, and once again, the impact of that, because a lot of us don't necessarily even think about just the economic impact of the port alone, right? Even if we're not necessarily looking at, the emissions, right? Which that's a whole nother conversation, and like where our communities are typically situated in relation to ports, and how typically neighborhoods and communities that surround ports have a higher rate of asthma and other respiratory issues in children and things like that. We're also not necessarily, we may think about the industries, right, that support the port, such as, once again, we're thinking South Louisiana. We hyper focus on refineries, right? Not realizing that the vast majority of the reason why the refineries can even thrive has a lot to do with the ports, the goods they're moving, things of that nature. So when we're looking at, once again, these pieces of policy like the Inflation Reduction Act and Justice 40 and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill that's taken the EPA environmental justice budget from $12 million to $2 billion basically overnight, right? We start to ask the questions like, okay, so how are we making sure that this is not a repeat of other initiatives, right? Where these funds that are supposed to be allocated towards our community are being, siphoned one way or the other, you know, due to nefarious actors, right? And what I'm also situated in this organization doing is kind of twofold as well. We are looking at taking the conservation movement, or like conservation organizations, traditional conservation organizations, and building these bridges to communities, right? And looking at co-creation of knowledge and like how, we are all looking at the same problem from different perspectives. Like, how are we in the conservation space positioned, right? How can we use where we are positioned, right, and work with communities to do what they're good at, right? One of my mentors in the organizing space, and I'm sorry for being real long-winded with this, one of my mentors in the organizing space, he once said that there's two forms of power, right? Organized money and organized people, right? Conservation organizations are typically really good at organizing money, right? They're not necessarily good at organizing people. Those of us in the activist and organizing space are typically really good at organizing people. We always struggle with the organizing money. So the question now is, how do we, build this bridge, right? Since we are all literally facing the same global problem.
I know you could probably go on for
all day.
I know you can, but that was a lot to ponder in thinking about how allies and oppositional folks can end up working together across lines of difference in order to get to a common goal, which is the hardest thing to do. So you ended with that, but that's the strategy. That's the action step is how do you organize when there are economic issues and at play, and tensions there are ideas that are different, methods that are different, but the goal is that of not destroying the planet so we can be here is something that should be galvanizing, and unifying. I'm going to pass it to Judith to talk about your work with Bayou City Waterkeeper. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that. Bayou City Waterkeeper is an organization that historically has worked around conservation, has been very white-led in the past, and focused mostly around the protection of wetlands and other ecosystems within the city of Houston, like the bayous, the parks, wetlands, and other forests. But it has grown and changed over the years, and most recently, Ayanna McLeod, who's the executive director, amazing friend, artist, Boz Queen, is really driving the way that this narrative expands beyond conservation, not just talking about protecting wetlands, but how to also engage in clean water or water justice, justice in the sewers. The city of Houston has so many problems stemming from sewage, backup, water treatment plants. What happens when we get hit with hurricanes and overflow and flood the cities, and not take care of the water treatment plants to keep them from flowing into communities and further impacting them. The other area of work that Bayou City focuses on is just climate transitions, which is something that as the organization is growing, we're helping the organization and the team to define more broadly and also more action driven. And so my role at Bayou City Waterkeepers, I didn't quite fit into what was already existing. And so Ayana invited me to apply, and together we sort of thought about creating this role for myself, as the organizing and cultural strategies manager. I've been in the city of Houston for most of my life and started organizing in 2012, 2013. And that's sort of how I joined the environmental justice movement, is through organizing and mobilizing my community of Manchester and the East End, against the Keystone XL pipeline. And then, of course, that expanded to other communities that I connected with, other frameworks to include other intersections to work around and work with, specifically around language justice, reproductive justice, and how all of these intersect and can help broaden our environmental justice movement and climate resiliency in the city of Houston, which has been, really great to come back. I also left Houston and lived in New Orleans for a little bit over 5-6 years on and off, staying transient and migrant through it, and picking up not just new relationships but new ways of thinking about how to incorporate policies that can continue to build that bridge between Houston and New Orleans, and thinking really broadly about how to become a city that is not just sustainable, but can serve as a model for what transitioning off of fossil fuels can look like and what a just transition could look like. And so as a cultural strategist, I'm supporting my team to think about all of these intersections and weave some of the learnings that I've come across over time, but also that I incorporated into my own language justice work, environmental and climate organizing, the just recovery work as well that goes into the environmental justice movement. And then also other aspects of cooperatism and economic justice, and rethinking how we can tap into our own cultural and traditional identities, our own resiliency stories, our own survival and migration stories, and seeing those as really tools to create and drive a lot of the work that we do. So that's sort of my role in a nutshell. I'm still figuring it out, and we all are at Bayou City Waterkeeper. We're growing. We went from, when I joined, it was 5 people in the staff, and now we're growing to a team of 11 or 12 people. And so that's also like this new way of building climate intimacy from the get, with this new team coming on, dreaming together, imagining and ideating together, and really taking on this opportunity to really recreate or expand on the legacy work that's happened in the city of Houston, with a new lens through, like, what is just climate transitions? What does it mean to transition into climate, into new technologies, into safer technologies, and frameworks that can help us get us there, and towards policy and overall, right? Incorporating policies that will further protect our communities and build resiliency. But yeah, centering people power, giving back power, finding ways to take back power and reclaim the waters that have been contaminated, and all of the things. So it's not a small feat, but I feel prepared, even though sometimes I get really overwhelmed. Ayana also did an amazing job at curating this team to really feed off each other, to really expand on our knowledge and our expertise. And then also centering arts and culture, like, it's a big part of the work that we want to do. And reimagining, we have to figure out how to illustrate this story, this new narrative shift for folks. And so incorporating our artistic practice as well into this work has been really affirming for me, to join the team and continue to think beyond organizational work, but also like, how do we step into community and continue to build our relationships with the natural world and continue to learn from the natural world that, has its own messiness. It's Houston's a very toxic city in every sense of the word, and we can reimagine how we can, help Houston to heal, help Houston to find a better way to continue to grow and develop, but also center natural solutions, nature-based solutions. And we could be a big driver of that. The city of Houston is one of the biggest cities, in not just in the state of Texas, but in the US. And so it really does give us a lot to think about. And it feels overwhelming to think about, as even I'm saying it all to you, but it's exciting as well, because it's this space of unknown, that really could be anything. And I want to lean into, I think it was you, Ebony, and you, Jennifer, who said this, that sometimes that's the exciting part, is like not knowing what you're stepping into, what you might create, but that's what's opening up, shape some of these solutions in a meaningful way, and centering language and culture and the history of the land itself as well, digging up the indigenous names for these bodies of water, for these parks. And that's also, a reclamation or decolonization method and ways of being. And it starts with just us knowing our own history, like where we're coming to, where we're from, and where we want to continue to be, where we want to continue to work, and be in it together, because we have to. Houston has lived through so many climate impacts that it's remarkable how the city has been forced to grapple with building climate intimacy into their work. That Houston Strong hashtag that came out after Harvey and after Ike and after all of these big massive hurricanes and storms really helped people to come together beyond race and class. You really have no time to think about anybody else's mess or drama or political stands on things. It's all about survival and loving the city so much, that you have to come together, and you have to let go of all of those different discriminations, those things that forces us to stay apart. It hasn't served us. And so I think in learning how to be intimate with each other during climate catastrophes has really helped the city to understand and embody and in experience, and in struggle, that we really need all of our communities to be together and to speak for the nature, for for different possibilities, and working with the land and the environment to figure out ways that we become more resilient, or we adapt and readapt, and also just get to thrive together, which is something I really want to see being back in the city, and working here.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Schuyler, I know you're coming to us from Columbia Climate School. What's happening over there? How are people being prepared to walk into the complexities of this land, environment, climate work? And I'm looking at the website right now, Climate Earth Society. So anything that might be of interest to folks who will be tuning in that you'd like to share?
Certainly. Well, we are, and thank you for sharing everything that you did, Edith. And thank you again for being such a gracious and warm facilitator, Ebony. It's nice to have such a sense of community in such a short time. With the Columbia Climate School, we are the first and only institution that is a school. There are centers, as you know, different innovation institutes centered around climate and or environmental justice, but we're the first and only school. And we will soon be 3 years old. So we're very, very new school, the first established at Columbia University in roughly 70 years. So there is, I think, a magnanimous undertaking, but a critical and necessary one when it comes to what we're developing and ideating. And my role as Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Anti-Bias, Anti-Racism, Accessibility, and Justice, yes, I added all those acronyms with intention, is to make sure that everything that we do is infused very intentionally by design with considerations around all of the intersections of decoloniality. Because what also must be mentioned is that any institution, particularly historically white institutions, were designed with a colonial mindset. And so by design are exclusionary in nature. And I don't mean that that's what they espouse or aspire to maintain, but that is, of course, the origin story, the genesis of how they came about. And when we're talking about specifically climate justice and climate change and environmental justice, I think it's I can tell you this with a lot of our incredibly brilliant basic scientist community who are working on everything from seismic shifts. And I mean, if you have an opportunity to peruse the website, you'll see how many centers we have, a lot of innovation. But I think what's of critical importance, particularly with the student programs that we're developing at the graduate and subsequently doctoral level for consideration and undergraduate majors, is that justice has to happen at every level. And it has to be both with a consideration. So it's both and with consideration of the global South and in the immediate environment. Because I can't tell you how many New Yorkers, particularly how many New Yorkers are in the academic space at a lot of our institutions of post-secondary learning in Manhattan, have never traversed the Bronx, which still just, again, where I share with you where a lot of my family lives. So it's interesting that we talk about, again, climate change and the most affected people in areas, oftentimes in literature, even though it's still in the nascent stages in a lot of ways when we think about how we're actually addressing it, as if it's distant. And I think there's a huge disservice when we fail to recognize the instances and opportunity for transformation, change, and innovation and regeneration in our most proximate and immediate communities. And the fact that we do take up space in Harlem, where I live and work, I'm very intentional in trying to essentially mobilize efforts in collaboration with my colleagues here, faculty, staff, and students, mobilize efforts that really pour our resources not only into our centers, into satellite programs abroad, which are necessary, again, in those most affected people, in most affected places and areas, but also right here at home, and working with organizations like yours, Ebony, making sure that we are partnering in ways that are meaningful and also help challenging, quite frankly. So the idea of the co-construction of knowledge, I'm actually challenging that idea because, again, coming from a decolonial lens, and my teachers have also been Kimberly Crenshaw, where I spent time in Cachoeira, Brazil, with a Black feminism and decoloniality course. Again, thinking about the ways in which even the co-construction of knowledge as a term can be co-opted, where in which the most well-intentioned folk think that the co-construction of knowledge means to still center oneself. And my pushback from a lens of decoloniality, and I share this with my colleagues, with our students, in my efforts to advocate and activate for communities local and global, is that no, as the purveyors with resources, fiscal and otherwise, as those who are attached to an institutional identity and an Ivy League identity at that, let's approach this from a position of humility, and let's center those who are experiencing it directly. Let's be humble enough to receive and eagerly invite, right? So extend an eager invitation to please articulate what your needs are. And then it is incumbent upon us to explore the ways in which our resources, whatever they may be, intellectual, fiscal, can support that. Because I've also understood, having worked in quite a few institutions in my career now, that oftentimes the co-construction of knowledge still somehow disenfranchises and negates to center those who are the most affected, and who've quite frankly been the most marginalized historically. So that's what we're doing. And doing that again at the local level, at the global level, and really trying to build out a very intentionally, radically diverse and disruptive curriculum that imbues all the intersections. Because I too believe that justice, climate justice, is tethered to, I'm going to share a quick anecdote. So I'm also a doula, and I studied with Sister Midwives, which is based in New Orleans, if you know New Orleans. And I also live in New Orleans part-time. So that's also part of my lifeblood, everything about it. And I say all this to say it's very interesting because, again, the reframing and what I'm doing in my role is to challenge the kind of linear way of thinking that so many, and I say this with love and affection, bench scientists or basic scientists have when it comes to things that feel more abstract, like justice, right? So I did a program where I brought in, during Women's History Month, a presentation from Sister Midwives to talk about the history of midwifery at the intersections of environmental justice. And I received a little bit of pushback on that, ironically, which was like, how is this related to climate change? What does this have to do with environmental justice? Y'all are smiling because y'all already know, right? So you already can kind of empathize and sympathize with the challenge of doing this work in a way that not only transforms our output and what we produce and how we collaborate, but the mindset of when and how we enter, and that this is a multifaceted intersectional issue. And it's not only with respect to oceanography, right? It's not only with respect to decarbonization, it's also with respect to Asthma Alley in the Bronx and empowering mothers who've been ringing the bell for decades now about how to get the support that they need by listening and amplifying their voices, right? So it's things like that, and thinking about infant mortality and morbidity and Black maternal health and morbidity, and how that is very much impacted by climate and environment. And so it's been a great ride. It's been a very busy. I haven't even been here a year yet. I make a year next month. Wait, September is tomorrow. Okay, so tomorrow. Yeah, but I've been very, very busy and have brought in actually activists and folks who are doing the work from New Orleans as well to present to our community of students, faculty, and staff, including broad community connections. Again, if you're a New Orleans person, you likely know who they are. So bringing in the Schomburg, bringing in Studio Museum, again, making sure that we are not simply taking up space and collecting buildings, which is the colonial footprint that we leave as an institution, but also familiarizing ourselves, being a part of the community, and also elevating opportunities to collaborate together with a position of humility. That's hugely important. So hopefully that answers your question.
I mean, yes. Thank you for roaming around in that question. We are at time, but I want Jennifer to talk about this, because you did, Dr. Schuyler, in on the power of culture and arts and what's happening uptown in Harlem, which is why, to be quite honest, when I was building this out with High Arts, I mentioned, wanting to curate Harlem-based institutions and organizations into this conversation, because the work that I do, although it is national, I live in Harlem, and the work that I'm being commissioned to do is a commission to make this work with the National Black Theater and the Apollo. And High Arts is also in El Barrio in Harlem. And so this idea of how do we collaborate across practice, right? From Columbia and the Climate School to incubation spaces like High Arts, to legacy spaces like the Apollo and National Black Theater. You know, the opportunity to get all of those ingredients in the gumbo and see what we can do that leaves a positive impact is important. And on that note, I'm going to actually ask Jennifer to have the last word because of the cultural space that you're incubating and bringing to the world, and the art that you're making that intersects with this conversation as well. What's going on the cultural front that you might want to leave us with, and how can we understand the work that you're doing through Saltwater and beyond as work that is connected to and extending this conversation around policy, legislation, education, so on and so forth. And we're going to wrap up after this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the space and the opportunity to share. So just tying back my work, being from Chicago, I'm a member of Honey Pot Performance, which is Afrofeminist performance collective. And the work that we've recently been doing has been heavily involving the use of the arts as a method and a way to incorporate community and community voice for the purpose of impacting policy and building policy specifically in the city of Chicago, and how can we use our particular methodology, our particular public engagement strategies to activate communities and lift up stories of the lived experience. And my particular focus has been on this idea of the intersections of public art and public health. And they're just inseparable. So that has become the importance of my particular work with Saltwater Road, and the importance of extending this conversation, bringing artists not only from Chicago, but across the globe, from within the experience, and centering this idea of liberation, beginning with what does it mean to live freely? And living freely means having these quality of life things, right? These things that give us this feeling of living, access to food, access to forms of expression, forms of cultural inheritance that we may or may not have access to. So that it's very important for our stories to be told, so that very much centering the ethnographic process, and very much centering storytelling and sitting at the feet of the elders, sitting under the tree, and engagement within the spaces. So my city is Montgomery. There's such history of civil rights work that it emerges from the earth, so that it's impossible for us to move away from antiquity, the stories of antiquity from afar. I'm in a rising third year PhD student at Northwestern, and this box is not where life happens, right? We got to get in, and that's my work has been community engagements, so that the words, you can tell me all you want. You can tell me how you can do all this on your own, but let me see it. Let me see what it looks like, so that if maybe you can do it, but there's a struggle, let's see how to mitigate this struggle so that there's help, right? So this idea of really coming into spaces and having the voice of the artist, the voice of the creator, the voice of the imagination, really speak to the enlivening and the revisioning of the spaces, past the history, past what has these structures that have informed how we walk, how we talk, what we spend our money on. How do we envision and recreate these spaces, sites included, right? Including the Alabama River where the brawl occurred, right? How do we reinvigorate and reimagine meanings? So the work of Saltwater Road has been to recreate space, not from antiquity, but forward facing, and increasing this conversation across the globe. And just one more thing to add, and I know we have to go. I was in conversation. I had the opportunity to be at a conference in Johannesburg, and I was in conversation with a sister who was born and raised in Johannesburg, one who is Jamaican, of Jamaican ancestry, born and raised in London, of Jamaican ancestry, born and raised in Jamaica, now living in Chicago, and myself with the Black American experience with my father. And I was struck by this conversation that occurred, which was the recognition across experiences of the impact of the civil rights and the social justice work and the civil the justice work that emerged out of the American South, right? And not only the American South, but smaller cities like Montgomery. And that really spoke to me about the global space, the global impact of justice, and like the meaning of justice as it spreads. So I am so thankful to be able to be in conversations with such brilliance.
Thank you. And thank all of you. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Thank you to High Arts for producing and presenting Holy Waters, a Ceremonial Sojourn, the conversation series. Thank you to all of the technicians and the support people who are working behind the scenes. Thank you to each of you for sharing your stories, sharing your visions, sharing your tensions, and your work with us this evening. This is the beginning of much, much more to come as we continue to build what will be our Harlem work in terms of my company, Jupiter Performance Studio, and our Harlem-based premiere that will be taking place next fall. Thank you all again for being here, and I appreciate your time, and more soon. Have a wonderful evening.